Hello, buddy. Welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the 8.3 patch notes. So if you're new to the channel, you can access this Google Doc in the description, and I'll also have some timestamps so that you can navigate and find the most interesting parts for you. It's probably going to be a long video, as most videos are on the channel, but the Google Doc plus the timestamps should help make it very approachable for you. So if you don't have time to watch the whole thing, it's no shame in just watching, a 15-minute section on whatever your favorite part is. But I much prefer to make these kind of longer videos with the navigation rather than to do like 5 or 6 shorter videos that are just really disjointed and a lot more difficult to navigate to find exactly what you want. So let's go ahead and get in here. Now, I am going to have a separate video for the tier list, the support tier list, and I might do another tier list also this patch. I'm not sure where, maybe mid or top lane, but I'll try to do at least a couple more tier lists at some point throughout this patch, just to keep everybody kind of up to date in terms of what I think about the overall meta. But the support tier list will come out maybe later today, maybe tomorrow. We'll see how much time I have, but it's going to be separate. I know sometimes I do patch notes and tier lists in the same video. It'll just be too long for this one. There's too much going on. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Okay, so there are two pretty big champion changes on this patch, and that's Swain and Viktor. So we'll talk about Swain, and then later on we'll get to Viktor. So Swain, obviously it's going to be difficult to fully gauge this champion because no one's seen him in action other than on the PvE. They did rework a lot of his abilities, so I'm just going to go through those just really quickly for you and just give you sort of my take on him. He does have 550 range, which is really important to note. There aren't a lot of people that can go top lane that have that kind of range. I think Kennen still has that range. I believe Nars is like 500 or less. I'm not exactly sure. But that's really far range for a top laner, so that means he's going to be able to get in a lot of pretty good harass early on with his auto attacks. He also has pretty respectable movement speed for someone that has that kind of range. So usually ranged champions are, it depends, but a lot of times they're closer to like 330 move speed. So that's pretty nice. So he has pretty good base stats. Pretty good base health regen with 7. So overall, his stats are pretty solid. Stats are pretty solid for a top laner, and I think that's where you will see him the most is top lane. I've seen some videos of people trying him out in the jungle or maybe mid lane, but I think he's probably still going to be best top lane. And the reason for that is he still has a lot of sort of damage over time abilities, and he needs that long lane so that he can run people down and get all of his damage in. So I don't think he will have some burst elements to him. But historically, he has been a top laner because he's a damage over time champion, and I don't think it has changed that much because he needs time to really take off. So mid lane is usually like higher mobility champions that have a lot of burst, so they can kill people before they get out of lane. Whereas top lane champions a lot of times need time to run people down, to chase them, and they're more damage over time type of champions for the most part. Not always, but for the most part. And so I think he's going to fit that model a little bit better. Now, it doesn't have the ranges up for a lot of his stuff yet on the Wikia, so I'm not entirely sure about those ranges. I did watch some videos with him. I watched a Night Blue video of doing him in the jungle, however legit that is. I don't know who he was playing against, but just to kind of see how some of the stuff worked. Some of the plays by people on the opposing team are pretty questionable, so I'm almost positive he was smurfing when he did that, or he was on like the PvE or something. And then I watched Freak's video sort of rundown of Swain. So the ranges look okay on his stuff. So basically you gain a soul fragment. You just right-click somebody whenever they're CC'd. You get to rip a soul fragment out of them. Pretty decent little cooldown. You can do this fairly often. It doesn't pull them like super far towards you. It looks like maybe like 100 range or something. But it applies a nice little tick of damage. Not a ton. Decent tick of damage. Gives you a soul fragment and does heal you for an okay amount. So if you can chain this together with your Never Move in Lane, which is not really that spammable, or your Vision of Empire, which is definitely not spammable, you can get some extra, some extra sustain. So I don't think you're going to be able to get a ton of opportunities for this in lane, so it's not something that's like spammable heal that's reliable, because your Q is kind of the thing you're going to be spamming, and that doesn't apply any sort of slow. Not innately anyways. And it only applies to immobilized champions. That's important to note, too, that, like, slows don't count for this. It has to be either, rooted or stunned or stasis. Well, you can't really hit a stasis person, but probably rooted or stunned would be the most relevant. So this only applies to slow. This does root them if you hit them with your Q. And then this doesn't have any sort of CC component to it, I believe. So it's really only if you hit the second part of your Q that's going to be relevant. So it's okay. You'll be able to do it in team fights. Is that a per target? I think that's just overall, not per target. So you can't hit, you know, everybody in a team fight with it. It'd probably be a little overpowered. So it's okay. I don't think it'll be super amazing for laning phase. It'll be all right. But it's a decent little ability. Adds a bit of extra CC to your kit. The Q is actually really interesting. The damage on this is very high if you're close range. I mean, if you hit them with every single bolt, and this is maxed out at level 9, that's 348 base damage with 0.96 AP ratio. It's interesting how the ratio... Oh, the per bolt bonus damage goes up per level. Okay. So not only does the base damage go up, but the per bolt level goes up. So you definitely want to level your Q up first. But yeah, I mean, needless to say, a 348 damage spell that's on a 2.5 second cooldown is pretty insane. That's a lot of damage. A lot of damage with a 0.96 ratio. So if you have 100 AP, I mean, you're talking like, you know, almost 450 damage. Like, that's more than most ultimates. And this is on a 2.5 second cooldown. So that is a ton of damage if you hit that. Now, you have to be close enough to hit these bolts. However... from how it looked at the videos, it looks like you can be a pretty decent level away, because it kind of fans out in like a 45-degree angle, like it says here. So it's a lot easier to hit multiple bolts than it is with something like a GLP or a Hextech Protobelt. Those seem to fan out in like at least a 60-degree type of angle. So it's much wider, which means that you have to be a lot closer to hit all of those bolts. This, you can actually be... I don't know, 300 units away. I don't know the exact amount, but it's not melee like it kind of is with Protobelt to hit them with every single bolt. You got a pretty good distance on that. So that means that there's an okay probability that you're going to consistently be able to hit this for full damage on people if you're doing an all-in or in a team fight. So that's really nice. Now, if you hit multiple people with it, then it does this damage to each person. So the penalty is only if you hit the same person with the bolts. But if you fan it out and you hit, you know, like 3 different people with the bolts, you'd get like 300 damage. Then all the other bolts would do, you know, bonus damage and so on and so forth. So this is really strong. This is basically a really good single target. Now, I don't know the range on this either. I assume it's probably like 600 or 700. I don't think it's going to be super far ranged. But it looked like I said, within 300 or 400 range, you could hit somebody with all the bolts. So that's the most likely scenario, I think. Now, it does give you extra damage or extra mana if you throw it through minions, and the bolts still continue on their way for harassment. So I think what you'll try to do with Swain here is you want to try to prep your minions to where you have several minions that are low, kind of like you would with like Gangplank or something, where you want a lot of your minions to be low, and then you cast this through those minions. So you can harass while you do it, but you can also just gain a ton of mana. I mean, if you kill 3 minions, if you have 1,000 mana, you kill 3 minions with this, you're going to be healing back, or getting back 90 mana. So it'd basically be a free spell at max level if you kill 3 minions with it. So that's pretty good wave clear and sustain, and as far as your mana goes. Now, if you're only killing like 1 minion, that's still a decent discount, though. I mean, it's only 55 mana to cast the spell, a harassment spell, basically, that can do up to 350 damage. In lane, and it's on a very low cooldown. So as long as you're killing minions with this, I think the mana is actually quite manageable. And if you run a catalyst item, then that'll heal you for quite a bit too over time, because you're going to be spending this mana. Now, I think that you will get the catalyst health heal based on your original mana that it costs to cast the spell. So I think it's 15% of the mana on catalyst. Let me see. 20% of the mana spent. So, you know, every time you cast this, then you'll get whatever it is, like 17 and a half, or 18 HP every time you cast this, and then you can get the extra mana regen off of that. So, you know, you'll be healing a decent amount if you can spam this in lane, and you're healing like 17 every time you cast it, and you're dealing damage to them at a reasonable cost of, like, you know, 55 mana or something like that in kind of the mid game. Like, that's pretty good. So overall, I think it's good spike damage. I think it has good utility with the maximum mana, and I think obviously in team fights where you're going to be able to hit separate people and get the full damage instead of just the reduced damage, it'll be really, really strong with the strong AP component. So I think this is a really powerful effect. 2.5 seconds seems pretty ridiculous on something that can do that much damage, so I think that'll be good. His Vision of Empire costs a lot of mana. That's the first thing to note about this, and it has a really long cooldown. But it does have a long range, so you can potentially throw this mid lane to get an assist or maybe help out a teammate and get a snipe. It does provide vision, and everybody that you reveal gives you a soul fragment. So I don't even think you have to hit them with it. You just get the soul fragment if you see 3 people. What? So if you just drop this in a team fight, you just straight up get 5 soul fragments. That seems pretty good. Now, you're not going to be able to use a ton of soul fragments. You can only use up to 5 in a fight, I believe. Yeah, I think you have to stop early, right? Hold on, let me see. Okay, yeah, so you can't cast like 2 demon flares in a fight. Can only do it once. So I feel like it's cool that you can get all these soul fragments, but I feel like a lot of times you're just going to be sitting on 5 of them. Oh. I just noticed something. So, like, at level 11, in a team fight, you just drop Vision of Empire in the middle of the team fight on 5 people, and you heal for 35% of your max health. Am I reading that right? Because it says every time you get a soul fragment. I think you technically get it even if you go over 5. It just only stores up to 5. So I believe you can still get it and trigger the health even if it's in excess. I don't know. I would have to test it. But if that's true, basically you can drop this in the middle of a fight and just heal for 35% of your max health. Because I don't think they actually have to get hit and slowed by it, by this 2 right here. Enemy champions are revealed, and each grants a Swain a soul fragment. So it's just like, boom, point click, 35% max health heal. You know, you have 2,000 health, just heal for 700, point click, not including Spirit Visage, which you'll probably get, you know, make it 1,000, just to keep it interesting. What? And if you do actually hit them with it, it has a 0.7 ratio with 300 magic damage, so this is very good. So if you have them snared or someone else has them snared and this like blows up on them, that's really strong. It also does not have a diminishing return on the slow, so they're just straight up slowed for 2.5 seconds. So yeah, that's that in combination with your passive, that's a lot of healing. Okay, so it's a long cooldown, but obviously it seems pretty strong. Okay, it does cost a lot of mana, but really good. Okay, never move. So this is like a line shot. It does go through everybody, every enemy. So you can hit multiple people in a team fight, and then it detonates on the first enemy hit. But it does deal damage to all nearby enemies and roots them for 1.5 seconds. So once again, in a massive team fight, and it doesn't say it has any diminishing returns, if you throw this through like 3 people, and it explodes on all of them, you know, you could be dealing up to 750 damage with a 0.5 and then rooting all of them for 1.5. Which you could rip one soul fragment out of them to heal whenever you do that. So pretty good. Kind of a longer cooldown. This is your nice sort of stun ability. But fairly long cooldown. You should be able to do it a couple of times in fights. I don't think you're going to get a lot of cooldown reduction on him. I'm not sure. You know, it's possible you might want to go something like Morellonomicon on him. I think that like either Rod of the Ages or GLP would be better. We'll talk about that with the itemization here in just a second. But, you know, if you do get a lot of CDR on him, it could be good. I still think that most of his damage is going to be his Q, though, and that has a very, very low cooldown. So you don't really gain a lot of benefit from cooldown reduction with that. But he does have a pretty high impact ult, and, you know, these abilities are both pretty good and have fairly long cooldowns, especially this one. So you just might want that 20% CDR. We'll see. You're giving up a lot of tankiness if you do that. And I feel like he needs that tankiness, though, because you want to stay in close, so you can constantly cast like max damage Qs. And I think that's more useful than having CDR, because Morello has no defensive stats on it. Whereas something like Rod of the Ages is going to have, you know, give you a lot of health. So, anyways, pretty good. So they changed his ult to where it gives you a bunch of bonus health. It's important to note that this is an infusion of health, okay? So this is not just kind of like Lulu or Nasus. It is not, it's not amplified by Spirit Visage or any other plus healing or shielding that you might have. So if you take like Revitalize or something, and that would give you, you know, 10% additional, you know, plus healing and shielding effects on yourself, it's not going to be affected by that, the bonus health. It's just like, boom, there's a lot of health, okay? It also is not affected by grievous wounds. So if they have a Morellonomicon tick on you, or they have executioners or whatever, that's not going to affect this bonus health, okay? So it doesn't benefit from plus healing and shielding, but it's also not reduced by grievous wounds. Okay, so when this is active, he drains the closest 3 enemies to him, prioritizing champions, and heals himself per hit. Reduced by 80%. Okay, so it only gets 20% benefit against minions and monsters. That is reduced by executioners, okay? So the initial health is not the bonus, but the healing over time is. It's a lot of damage, once again. That's damage per second, and I believe that's per target. So, yeah, that's a lot of, and with 170 AP ratio. Now that's over 12 seconds, so it's unlikely somebody's going to sit in this for the full 12 seconds. So that's a bit of a rosy scenario. But you are healing a lot. So if you're healing with hitting 3 people with this in a team fight, that's 135 healing per second. It would be amplified by Spirit Visage or Revitalize. And pretty good damage. Not like eye-popping damage, but like okay damage. This is really good damage, though. So you consume all of your soul fragments, dealing magic damage to all nearby enemies. So if you have 5 of these bad boys, you know, it's 375 damage to everybody with a 135 ratio. Which is okay, but you got to keep in mind the Q is doing more damage than that every 2.5 seconds. Basically. Now, that's only single target, though, if you're focusing that. But yeah, I mean, if you hit him with a Q and you explode this on him, I mean, you'll easily, in the mid-game, be hitting for more than 1,000. Pretty strong burst damage. Now, you have to heal a lot of health before you can use this. So, once again, he's not designed to be like, you know, point, click, boom. Like, you have to be able to get some healing in. That's even more reason to get something like a Spirit Visage, because you would heal faster, which would allow you to use your the damage component of it a bit more. Now, I don't know the explosion radius either, but it seemed about like Vlad's explosion radius on his E, I think. So, pretty good. So, pretty good area of effect damage here. Solid area of effect damage here. Really nice AoE and single target on his Q. And just like ludicrous healing if that interacts the way that I think it does, with some pretty good damage. I mean, that's 300 damage with a 0.7. So, a lot of damage, ludicrous healing on Vision of Empire if that interacts the way that I think it does. And really good healing here as well. So, I think he's going to be kind of like old Swain. Very similar to old Swain, but a lot more damage. I feel like this is potentially really over the top. Like, that's just, like, insane damage in my mind. With how easy it is to hit all of those procs. Like I'm saying, it's only a 45-degree angle. And those procs are pretty fat. Like, those blades are pretty fat. Like, I'm telling you, it looked like it was really easy to hit them all on the same person. Like, a lot easier than a proto belt. So, I think Swain will be pretty good. I think he'll be a top 5 top laner right now. Remember that 550 range, too. That's going to give him a lot of harass early. And this is pretty good sustained harass, too, if you use your Q through minions on people. He will still be susceptible to getting ganked. He doesn't have any escapes, so he's kind of going to suffer from, like, Rumble-itis here, where you could potentially be pretty oppressive early on, but if you get ganked, it's going to be a real problem. So, I'm not sure if he'll see a lot of competitive play because of that. It's possible, though. I mean, it's possible. Yeah, he can stun people with his Never Move and maybe get out of there, and he can use this for, like, a slow to maybe escape. But yeah, I think he's going to be open for ganks. But in solo queue, I think he'll be, you know, potentially really strong, like an Alawi, or maybe not a Nasus as much. But Alawi, it kind of reminds me of that, where it's going to catch people off guard with a lot of the damage. And if you just get to sit alone in lane, you can be pretty oppressive. But if you get ganked, that can be a big problem. So I think he has good sustain, good burst, 550 auto range. He's likely going to be one of a top laner. His mana costs are still pretty high, but the Q helps you out with that. So I don't think you'll see him in support. I think people are asking about that because his main way of getting mana back is to hit CS, and you don't want to be hitting a lot of CS as a support. So I think he's a no-go for support. A big question for me, though, especially competitively or at higher elos, is like, is he going to be better than Vlad or Galio? Because they're kind of serving a similar role, right? Where they're kind of this tanky, bruiser-ish AP threat. Galio's going to have a lot more reliable CC and global presence than he has. Probably less damage. Almost certainly less damage than Swain. I mean, maybe that does make Swain like a more viable mid laner than top laner because he doesn't have those escapes. I don't know. We'll see. And I don't know how he stacks up against Vlad. I'd have to crunch the numbers. I didn't do that specifically for this video, but he does have more CC than Vlad does. I'm just not sure about his sustained damage in late game team fights, but it's possible. It's possible. I think that what people should be doing with him is probably Glacial Augment. They did just buff Glacial, don't forget, for ranged champions. Last patch, it is... Do I still have Glacial up here? I don't think I do, but I can pull it up right here. It's 30% initial slow, and it goes to 40%. So it ramps up to 40% slow over 2 seconds on somebody, which is great. That's going to allow you to almost certainly hit your never move. It's going to allow you to hit them in the face with your Q, run them down, and just stick to them with your ult better. So I think Glacial Augment's going to be really good. He has 550 range to apply that. So you can just walk up, auto somebody. They're going to be slowed. Then you just walk up and Q them in the face for a lot of damage, I think. And that combos together really nicely with GLP, which is already pretty good on him. And the reason that I like GLP, I think a lot of people are probably still going to use Rod of the Ages on him, which is good. But GLP is pretty strong as well. Now, GLP does cost more, right? It costs 250 more, but you get the value immediately, okay? And that's really important to note, that you get the value out of this immediately. You have to wait 10 minutes on Rod of the Ages. So that's a lot better on really late game scaling champions that aren't going to have a ton of power early. And Rod of the Ages is obviously a better bargain in the late game, right? So, you know, you're getting about 150% gold efficiency off of this item once it's fully stacked, which is really nice. I mean, obviously, it's 300 more gold for GLP. So you're going to have like 20 more ability power, which is important. How much? So you get 500 health, 400 mana. So you're getting the same mana. So you're basically you're losing 20 ability power and 200 health, which is a heavy cost. But in exchange for that, you're getting this power immediately. You don't have to wait on it. You know, you don't have to wait an additional 5 minutes to unlock your full 80 ability power. And you get a ratio on it. So you get something that's going to deal extra damage, which is very valuable. I mean, dealing that extra 100 to 200 damage is nice. Now, it's important to note that multiple bolts do not deal multiple damage to people, unlike Protobelt. Protobelt could be another decent option. I mean, Protobelt is a lot cheaper. It does give CDR, and it does get you into their face so that you can proc your Q. So you Protobelt right into their face, you deal some damage with the bolts, and then you hit them with the Q. So Protobelt could be a pretty decent like burst damage option that's going to have a faster power spike, so you're going to be able to get it at 2,500 gold, but overall it's going to be, you know, less damage in the long run. So, you know, you could do something like Protobelt into Lichbane with him that would give you some mana, that would get you close enough with your Protobelt to use your Q for max damage, and the Lichbane would deal that extra bit of burst. So, I mean, you might see, like, Protobelt Lichbane builds, especially if it's in the middle and you're looking for massive damage. But I think GLP is pretty underrated. That slow is very nice, too. Now, it's only over 0.5 seconds, but if you go Glacial Augment, which is what I'm recommending, then it does generate that slow field So, slowing an enemy champion with an active item triggers your freeze ray that cuts through, creating a slowing field for 5 seconds that slows enemies inside by 60%. Can fire upon multiple enemies concurrently. So if you hit a bunch of champions with that GLP, it's going to put that slow field around them. And the slow field basically looks like Iceborne Gauntlet. It kind of creates these little zones of slow. But in a team fight especially, that's really, really nice. Because it lasts for 5 seconds, it's a 60% slow, which is huge. That means that you can run them down even more, hit them with more Qs. They're going to be sitting in your ult more. It's going to guarantee you're going to hit your E on them, your Eye of Eldritch, yeah, your slow from the, or your stun from the Never Move, and your Eye of Eldritch. You're basically going to hit your full combo on them and probably be able to get 2 or 3 Qs off. So it's almost certain they're going to die if they can't turn around and duel you. Also, that's very good with Liandry's, right? Because both your Glacial Augment and your GLP are applying slows to people, and when you're hitting people with your spells off of Liandry's, then it's going to constantly take that extra damage off of Liandry's. So usually, people with Liandry's, right here, you see it's 4% of the target's current health, and it has penetration, good ability power, good health. It's just an excellent item, and 15, yeah, the 15 pin on it. So a really good item, but with Glacial Augment, with GLP, you're constantly going to have slows on people. In fact, multiple people. So when you turn your birds on, you have your GLP, these slow fields everywhere. All of your birds off of your ult are going to apply that 4% current health to everybody in a team fight. So that is a lot of extra damage in a team fight with him. And you don't have to buy Ryze to get that effect. That's huge, because Ryze sucks. Like, it is a bad item. You have to pay so much for that slow. Like, yeah, it does have ability power on it, and yeah, it does have some health on it, but overall, you really don't want to buy that item if you don't have to. And if you're going, you know, Glacial GLP, then you don't have to. Okay, so that allows you to skip it and just go on to more damage. So I think that a really good build for him would be like Sorcerer Boots, GLP, Liandry's. And you'll get that nice power spike with the GLP. You'll have the completed, good, solid stats. You'll have the slow off of the Glacial GLP combo so that you can land everything. You know, once you complete this around level 9, you'll hit them with like 2 or 3 full damage Qs because they won't be able to get out of your slow. So that potentially is a really huge, like, single item power spike on him. And then completing your Sorcerer Boots and Liandry's is going to complete that, is going to deal even more damage because that's double penetration and you get the full damage off of Liandry's. And the penetration applies to the Liandry's. So when you do that 4% current health, it's going to deal, in effect, like an extra 30% damage because it's going to reduce 30 of their magic resist off of it. So that is a really, really good 1-2 punch, I think. The GLP Liandry's combo with Glacial Augment. Also, if you go runes in the inspiration tree, you can go approach velocities. That's going to give you 10% extra movement speed when you're moving towards these people that you've slowed with your Glacial Augment and your GLP. So that's going to allow you to stick even closer so you can land even more Qs on people. So I think this is the premier, you know, run them down, blow them up with your Qs build with this. And then you get to choose whether you want to get perfect timing or magical footwear. And then I'm not sure at tier 3 against tough matchups you can take Biscuit if you want. That does, remember, Biscuit does improve your maximum mana by some amount. Let me see, 15%, and it gives you maximum mana by 40. So that will give you 160 extra mana, which is good. It's like a 200 gold value or so. And it restores 15% of your missing health and your missing mana, which is really, really nice. So, and don't forget that you get the bonus off of Inspiration, so that's going to actually give you 20% more healing and shielding off of Biscuit. So, Biscuit's a pretty good option for someone like Swain. Futures Market is good if you really want to hit that GLP faster, because I think that's going to be a serious power spike for him. And Minion Dematerializer, I'm not really sure about this. I know some people get this. You'd have to crunch the math specifically for Swain to see at which break point he can one-shot the back line of minions. It could be good in certain matchups, but it's going to require a lot more math that I'm not going to do in this video. This has already taken long enough. How long were we, like 30 minutes or something? Yeah. So, but Swain's new, so I wanted to spend a lot of time on Swain. But yeah, I mean, I think that like Glacial Augment into probably perfect timing to help you against dives early on. And you can get Hourglass later if you really want to with this. Into Biscuit, into Approach Velocity is really good. And then as your secondary, if it's a tough matchup, I'd probably go Second Wind. If you can get away with it, Revitalize is great, though, because you get an extra 10% healing on yourself. Don't forget, they changed this a few patches ago. This includes healing on yourself. Self-healing and shielding are increased by 10% if you're below 40% health. So that's really nice on Swain if you think you're going to be dipping down low over time. And then or if it's a tough lane, like I said, you can go Second Wind. Then either Iron Skin or Mirror Shield will help you out in your matchups top lane. You know, you can go... actually, another option, like this, so this is good in a tough lane, maybe Second Wind, Iron Skin or something if you're against, I don't know, something's going to be harassing you with AD a lot early. But another option that I thought about as well, if you really want to pressure your lane, is Cheap Shot, because you're going to have Glacial Augment, right? And it's on a 6-second cooldown. This is on a 4-second cooldown. So you just auto-attack somebody, and then just auto-attack them again, and you're going to get a free, like, 15 true damage on somebody, which is like 30 extra, you know, magic damage early on. Just very loose math there, but it's a lot of extra damage because it's true damage. So Glacial Augment means you can do this just about any time you want. So you have 550 range in lane. You can just constantly auto-attack them and deal quite a bit of damage early on. Then you have Ravenous Hunter, which is clearly really awesome on Swain because he has a ton of area of effect damage, and all the damage dealt by your abilities heals you for a ton, right? So up to 12.5% spell vamp effectively. So that's super, super good on Swain. So I think, and if you're in a tough lane, once again, you know, you can still go Taste of Blood. So Taste of Blood doesn't quite make up. It's not the same amount of healing as Second Wind, but it's pretty close. So tough lane, if you don't want a cheap shot, you can go Taste of Blood. But Ravenous Hunter is the real prize here. That is a very, very good rune for Swain and his build, especially because you're probably going to get Spirit Visage at some point too. You're going to get even more healing off of it. So this is just like insanely good on Swain. I don't think I'd go anything in here. I mean, nah, that just doesn't make sense. Like here, if you really want like Mana Flow Bands, or, you know, maybe Transcendence for some more CDR later on, or if you're in like if you're playing mid lane and you're against a heavy burst mid laner like a LeBlanc, maybe you feel like you need Nullifying Orb or something. You could always go Abyssal Mask instead of GLP. It's not as cool with Glacial Augment, but it's still possible. But yeah, I think this is a little bit less appealing. So I would probably go for Inspiration, and he has such good AP ratios as well. If you go Inspiration into Domination, you get quite a bit of AP, just as your passive instead of health. Like Inspiration into Resolve gives you a lot of health, but Inspiration into Domination gives you a good chunk of AP. So it just depends. This is the more aggressive option with better scaling on Ravenous Hunter. This is kind of your early game. I just want to survive with Second Wind and Iron Skin sort of build and the extra HP. So it's up to you. But I do think that the Glacial into either Perfect or Footwear, Biscuit, and then Approach Velocity just works really, really well with him. And then as far as items, like I mentioned before, I think GLP, Leandry, Sork Boots is pretty standard. That's what I would recommend. You'll see people going Rod of the Ages. I think that's definitely a missed opportunity for a really, really good combination with Glacial Augment and Leandry's. And just having that power spike a bit faster, because he has such a terrifying early to mid game. Once he hits level 9 and deals, you know, 400 damage on a 2.5 second cooldown with his Q, I would really want to abuse that if I was Swain. So, and then if you really want the big damage, you can go Void Staff. You can also start getting something defensive at this point. You know, you can go Spirit Visage. You could go Zhonya's Hourglass. If you do think you want to go Zhonya's, like the enemy team has a Zed or a Talon or something like that, or like a Karthus, and you just know you really want that Zhonya's effect, then make sure that you go Stopwatch. If you're pretty sure you're not going to go Zhonya's if they don't have a lot of AD threats, and you just want to itemize in a Spirit Visage and Void Staff, like you just know your team needs a lot of damage, like maybe you have a Nunu jungle and a Zillion mid and like an Ezreal bot lane, and you're just like, man, I got to go big damage Swain or we're just not going to have enough damage, then maybe go Footwear instead of Stopwatch. Now, I don't know if Zhonya's works the same way with the current Swain ult that it did in the past with Swain. I assume it probably does, but I just don't know. I haven't seen the interaction yet. So if it does work the same way as old Swain, where you can go in there and then stopwatch and heal a lot, that's really strong. Although keep in mind, with new Swain, you really want to stick to them so that you can keep spamming your Q. So if you Zhonya's, they're going to have more time to create distance and get away from you. But that will also let you initiate a little bit more with like a GLP, you know, run in with your Vision of Empire, never move, pop your ult, and then just run into a lot of them. Zhonya's, heal back up with all your birds, and then you should have your healing threshold, and then as soon as you wake up, Demon Flare, boom, blow everybody up. So I think Zhonya's is still pretty good if it has that same interaction. But yeah, overall, I think he's going to be really good. I wasn't sure last night. I hadn't crunched the numbers on him, but after like looking at him and researching this for like an hour today, I think he's actually going to be really good. I think he'll be maybe like a best 10 top laner. I could say top 10 top laner, but that kind of sounds confusing. He might even be best 5. I don't know for solo queue. I mean, I still think that Alawi and Nasus are going to be really problematic top lane because they haven't touched them yet. They're both really good, but he's going to be good. He's going to be really good, I think. Top lane and possibly mid lane. Okay, but that's it for Swain. Let's move on here. So, excited. I think Swain will be good. I think he has a decent skill cap to him, but not that bad. A lot of people will be trying him out and failing with him, most likely, over the next few days, but I think he will be really good, especially if people ever figure out the Glacial GLP Leandri's interaction. I think that's pretty beast on Swain. Pretty beast mode. Also, anyone else who has Leandri's will benefit from these slows. So if you have a Zyra on your team, or you have a Talia on your team, or whatever, like, you know, going something like a GLP could potentially benefit your whole team. Or anyone who's running cheap shot will benefit from it. So I think that's good. Or anyone who just, like, you know, has difficult skill shots to hit, where if they, you know, land their skill shots, it's going to be brutal. So, like, Viktor, which we'll talk about in a little bit, has really powerful skill shots. There's a lot of chances for interactions from the enemy. So, you know, giving those slows for Viktor is really strong. Like Azir, who can just sit there and just pound people. I mean, the AoE slow is obviously just really strong in a lot of comps. So, I think Swain will be really good in a lot of team comps. He also is finally going to offer a pretty respectable top lane AP option in case your mid lane, you know, auto locks Zed and your jungler auto locks Kayn or something like that, which is very common these days. So having an AP top option that's respectable is really nice. As long as you don't get ganked and camped and murdered, you know, as long as you don't get the rumble treatment top lane. Okay, Azir, I think he's still going to be good if you're really good with Azir, but I think this is definitely going to hurt his early game. So he's not going to be able to reposition his soldiers nearly as often. I mean, 4 seconds is a lot early on. I don't know if you max your Q or your W first on the soldiers. Let me see. Not sure if you max Q or W first. Who's going to know what they're doing here? I mean, a lot of them do, but let's see. Shifter's a pretty smart player. Okay, yeah, it looks like you do max your Q. Okay, I wasn't sure. The W... I guess the W just gives you the attack speed, and the Q is really your early game burst damage. So it's not as bad. If you're maxing Q, you know, level 9, it will normalize, but it is going to hurt your early game trading. And the big thing here, I think, is the soldiers now draw minion aggro to Azir. That's pretty big, because you're not going to be able to poke without taking back. Now, it doesn't sound like a huge deal, but it's pretty big. So, like, level 1, you try to go up, or, like, level 2, I guess would make more sense. You Ryze, you try to go up with your Q, you know, harass somebody, and then you end up taking, like, 3 minion hits. So you end up taking, like, you know, maybe you deal, I don't know, 90 damage to them, but then the minions hit you back for, like, 40. I mean, you know, doing the math on that, if that happens like 10 times in lane, like that's a lot. That's a lot of lost trading power potentially. So that was one of his big strengths, is that he wouldn't, you know, he could harass without having to worry about minions hitting you back. Especially after that last patch where point-click champions like Ryze, if they put the W on you, they were going to draw minion aggro. That was one of Azir's big strengths, is he would not draw minion aggro when he does this stuff. So I think it's definitely going to hurt his early game, especially for people who aren't, who aren't prepared to play around the minion aggro, who aren't really respecting minion aggro. I think that's going to be really rough. So especially for lower level Azirs, this change could be pretty rough for him. So I don't know. I didn't think Azir was like that big of a problem. Like, he can be really good if you're good with him. I understand he's popular in pro play, so maybe they need to nerf him a little bit. I think he'll still be good. This does open up a space for someone like Cassiopeia potentially to start coming back if Azir gets nerfed too much. But we'll see. I think he'll still be good. This definitely knocks him down a little bit. I'm not sure who would take his place. I mean, I guess Ryze is probably one of the biggest winners here, as far as competitive. But I don't know. Like, maybe we start seeing Talia again. Maybe we start seeing, I mean, we could see Viktor. Maybe. I don't know. That's optimistic. But this might open up a space for some more mid laners. Solo queue probably... It does matter if you're an Azir one trick, but for most people, a lot of people just are not good on that champion anyways. He's very hard to play, so I don't think it will affect the solo queue meta in like bronze, silver, gold too much. Okay, Jarvan, pretty good nerf. He has a lot lower armor. This doesn't seem like much. Oh, it's just 4 armor, but that's 80 gold worth of value, so that's just like robbing Jarvan of 80 gold early on. It's like he starts off the game with 420 gold instead of 500. So each armor point's worth 20 gold. So... It's a pretty big deal early on. His first clear will be a little bit more dangerous. Now champions that invade him, like Lucian, Nidalee, Kha'Zix, you know, those type of champions will be able to fight him more successfully early on. Now, I'm not sure. I don't think that's going to affect how his armor grows over time. I'm not 100% if the armor growth is coded off of his base armor or not. But overall, I think it's just designed to hurt his early game, just to make him, give him more clear identity as sort of a mid-game powerhouse champion, and I think he'll still serve that role. So, it's pretty good. I don't think he's that oppressive in solo queue. I think he's good now. I think he has been nerfed several times. So I think he's still pretty good. And I think he'll still continue to be good. Okay, Jhin. It doesn't matter. I mean, the big problem with Jhin is not this. Like, it's not that his ult doesn't do enough damage. People don't hit those ult shots a lot anyways. His big problem is that he's a victim of poor itemization and runing. So they have nerfed lethality a lot, which is what he really wants. He does a lot of early game damage because his abilities do quite a bit of damage early on. So, you know, his Q plus his W, and then his critical strike early on with his passive is good, but he's really hard to play in general. Like, W is a very slender skill shot. His ult is a lot easier to dodge now because it doesn't apply nearly as much of a slow as it used to. So I think they need to buff him up. I mean, I think they need to make something about the skill part of his kit, like maybe make his traps do a lot more damage, so that if you skillfully, you know, like auto W somebody and keep them in the traps, it does more. So like maybe make the traps do a lot more damage. That would give him better wave clear and zone control. If you wanted to kind of make him sort of like a Caitlyn type of champion. So if someone stepped on a trap and he's fast enough to pull the trigger and hit him with the W to keep him in it, I think that would be an interesting line of play there, to where you would have another zone control champion like Caitlyn, except make him, I don't know, just have a bit more burst and utility than Caitlyn, but not as much pushing power. So I think they should just carve his identity like that, because right now there's just not ever a reason to pick Jhin over Miss Fortune, because Miss Fortune is the same thing. She's an early game bully champion, primarily ability based, uses lethality, but she scales so much better into the late game because she always has her ultimate that does a lot of damage, especially in team fights. So she is like the clear early game bully, late game team fight champion. So Miss Fortune has a very clear niche. I don't think she's overpowered, but I think if you want something that's a bit different, you want early game aggression and you want better team fighting than someone like a Kog'Maw or a Jinx who takes time to scale, then I think that she's a better option. Then right now, Caitlyn's the best like zone and siege option. You don't see it a lot in solo queue, but it's better in pro play. But Jhin just really doesn't have a place. It's like he has early game aggression. He has some neat like abilities in his kit, but there's just not a tactical reason to pick that champion right now. Like, historically, he's been very oppressive in the early game when lethality's been really good. But, you know, right now with the runes, and lethality just being nerfed, and just like frankly, you know, Ginsu's Rage Blade and Critical Strike champions both being so on hit and crit both being a lot better than lethality ADCs right now, he just doesn't have a place. So I would really like to see them play around his traps and his W interaction to make that sort of his key thing now. Just to give him, so kind of make him like a Caitlyn, but better sort of early game burst damage and just kind of maybe more interesting utility on his ult. Like maybe his ult, I don't know. I like the concept of the ult creating like a zone, like potential initiation and like a zone of controls to make him another zone champion. So that's how he was originally used. A big part of it was you could use his ult to engage. And that's why a lot of team comps would run him, because he'd have really, really long range. It required some skill shots, but you could just spam your ult on people and do a lot of damage. So let me just look at him really quick historically, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Then we'll move on. Because I want them to make Jhin good again. I think he's a lot of fun. I think people enjoy him. You know, his aesthetic, his story. You know, he's just a cool champion. But the problem is, you know, back in the day, so what, they nerfed his Dancing Grenade. That's fine. That's just a point-click ability. I don't mind that. Increase the damage on his Curtain Call a little bit. It's like early Season 7 when he was really strong. They should make it where you can't clear the traps also. Kind of like Caitlyn. Okay, and they lowered the base damage. This is where I think they started going wrong. So it doesn't do as much base, and they made it where it was an execute ability. I would like to see them like turn it back into an initiation ability instead of an execute ability. So that would put him in line with something like an Ashe as an initiation champion, or maybe like a Varus with even longer range, but like not a stun, just a slow with some counterplay to it. Okay, so they did a lot of stuff there, but that was kind of the nail in the coffin, I think, was when they lowered his ult damage a lot, and they lowered the slow on it. I don't know if it says that anywhere in here. Okay, I don't see it, but they lowered the slow on it by quite a bit at some point. So I think that they should give it a bigger slow, like still allow some counterplay to it, but give it a bigger slow, give it a little bit more base damage on it. Like, it shouldn't be like you can completely zero someone out from far away. At least give it the slow. If they don't want to give it the damage, I would give it the slow. And maybe make it something like if enemies hit them, they like maybe it shreds armor or something like that. I don't know. But just make it some kind of like long range initiation tool. That's what I would like to see instead of like an execute, because people can block the shots too. I don't know. I just feel like as an execute, there's already enough of that in the game between like Jinx Rocket, you know, like Draven ult, Ezreal ult. Like that's all good that it's execute, but there just aren't that many long range engage ADCs, and I think having more engage from the ADC role is interesting. I like that. Like, I like Ashe. She's not a good place right now, but I like her kit that she has engaged from the ADC role. Or like Varus, slightly shorter range. So I think Jhin having the ability to start fights and stuff like that would be really cool tactically. So just like a zone of control, can start fights from range. I think that's how they need to buff him. Don't just give him a little bit of like extra damage on his ult. I mean, who cares? It's not enough to matter. Okay. Katarina, pretty good nerf. Kat's not like, I mean, maybe she was tearing up the win percentages, I don't know, but she's very, very oppressive if she gets really far ahead. Like, yeah, you can CC her, of course, you know, you can say that about any champion, but she does so much damage, and it just requires so, like, your reaction time has to be so fast if she pops up out of a bush or something. And just those resets, like, she can just completely delete an entire team, like, in the blink of an eye. And she's so mobile, like, she can just constantly jump around everywhere. It's hard to hit her with skill shots sometimes. So, she does have an abysmal laning phase, so you can't abuse her in lane, but, I don't know. She's just a real abuser of, like, single item Gunblade Spike, especially with her passive. Just gives her a ton of scaling. Her passive, I talked about this in past videos, but with Electrocute, Electrocute scaling off of AD and AP, and the fact that she rushes Gunblade, and her passive scaling off of AD and AP, just makes the single item power spike on Gunblade too strong. I mean, I would almost like to see them nerf Gunblade a little bit, or nerf Electrocute a little bit, instead of just Katarina, but I guess they don't want to hurt other champions that use that, like Akali or LeBlanc, who, to be fair, aren't super oppressive right now, so I don't know. It's fine. Whatever. It's fine. I don't think it's going to affect the meta that much for two people. Like, Cat Evolved and these other, like, Katarina, like, one-trick players are definitely going to notice this. But, you know, for the vast majority of people in the meta, it's not going to matter, and it has no impact on pro play. Now, this is pretty important. Kog'Maw W damage down. 5% at max level. Now, I watched LS's patch notes, and he was thinking this isn't a big deal. It's only 2%. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal, because you don't want to think of it in terms of 2%. You want to think of it in, like, in the proper context, right? So it's 2% out of a maximum of 7%. That's 29% less damage, because it only dealt 7%. You know, you could say, oh, it's just 2%, but you can say, oh, it's just 7%. That 7% is a lot of damage. I mean, that's why Kog'Maw does so much damage. Because you have to remember how many times he's going to hit people with that 2%. Because he attacks really quick. He gets a lot of on-attack speed things. And with Ginsu's Rage Blade, which I don't know if I have Ginsu's up here right now. With Ginsu's Rage Blade, he gets double hits every other hit. So really, you know, 2 attacks is 3 attacks. So all of a sudden, you know, instead of every 2 attacks, he's dealing 21% of their maximum health damage, he's only dealing 15% of their maximum health damage. And that's a lot less than it used to be. So, you know, when you think about it like that, you know, if he gets in easily 4 attacks or whatever, which turns into 6 attacks off of Ginsu's Rage Blade, you know, 6 attacks at losing, that's 12% of their max health that you're losing off of that, 'cause it's 2% per swing. So that's not that much. It's just 4 attacks, and you're already losing 12% of their max health in terms of damage. So if it's a 2,000 damage target, you're losing 240 damage off of that. That's a very, very big deal. So I don't think that it's going to make Kog, like, completely unviable, but it's going to allow for a lot more counterplay than there currently is right now for Kog'Maw. Because he's not going to be able to melt tanks nearly as fast, especially if those tanks get Adaptive Helm, because that's going to give Adaptive Helm time to warm up. And a lot of people may not realize this, but his W is magic damage. So if you run Adaptive Helm, and I don't see people get this item enough against Kog'Maw, this is much, much more effective than getting an armor item. So if you're afraid of Kog'Maw, you should definitely be thinking about Adaptive Helm instead of you know, something like a Randuin's. Like, I'll see some people be like, oh god, Cog's fed, let me get a Randuin's. Randuin's is for critical strikes. This is what you need against Kog'Maw, okay? Because most of his damage is going to come from that W and Ginsu's. Okay, so the W on Kog'Maw is magic damage. Okay, maximum health, it's magic damage, okay? And it's the multiple hits. It's being able to trigger W multiple times off of Ginsu's Rage Blade. And Ginsu's also does on-hit magic damage. And if you get a Wit's End, which is pretty common on Kog'Maw, that is also doing 40 on-hit magic damage. Now that does shred some magic resist, but it's flat magic resist. So that means that the more magic resist you have, the less impact that shred is going to have. That shred can put you in the negative. It's unlikely, because most people are going to have, you know, at least 30 magic resist. But it's important to get a lot of magic resist against Kog'Maw, because he's primarily going to be dealing magic damage. You know, because when he goes Ginsu's into either Wit's End or Hurricane, that's almost all magic damage. He's not building any AD. It's just strictly damage off his W. Now, once he gets Blade of the Ruined King, the Blade damage, I believe, is physical damage. Yeah, it's on-hit physical max health damage, okay? So that starts to become a little more interesting, because he's doing percentage health physical damage. But at least for most of his damage, you need to be going Adaptive Helm. And taking magic damage from a spell or effect reduces subsequent magic damage taken by that spell by 20% for 4 seconds. Okay. So you're not only getting 55% magic resist, which is a lot, and you're getting health, but you're also reducing the damage by an additional 20%. So that's a really, really big deal against Kog'Maw. And a lot of people just don't realize that. So I think if people realize this and they itemize to get Adaptive Helm against Cog if they're a tank, then this is going to do significantly less damage. So I think Cog will still be viable. But I think that potentially something like Jinx, Tryst, or Twitch could be better options, especially Jinx and Tryst. Now, sometimes Kog'Maw is really good because that AP damage, he's a great mixture if the rest of your team is full AD. So if you have that, you know, Talon middle and Kayn jungle, then Kog'Maw is actually a really, really good option. And he still will be a really good option because he's mostly magic damage. So he's really good if your team has, you know, 2 or 3 other AD threats on it. But if you have other magic damage on your team, like let's say you have a Swain top and a Taliyah bot lane, or Taliyah mid lane rather, then you actually really don't want to go Cog because then they can itemize into Adaptive Helm or Spirit Visage, and they'll probably get Locket and things like that. So if you have double AP, if you already have AP top and AP mid, then you definitely do not want to go Kog'Maw now because Magic Resist is going to be too strong. So in those kinds of cases, and a lot of people are going to be playing Swain, so it's likely you're going to have double AP for the first, you know, week or so here. Because people are going to like him. He's a new champion-ish, a reworked champion, and I think he's actually going to be strong. So you're probably going to be seeing a lot of double AP. So that means that Jinx is a better option because she's pure AD damage now. She didn't get any reduced damage. She's very strong. Like, very, very strong. Snowballs really hard. Has a pretty good laning phase. Chompers is great combination with other CC. So she's great with Tahm Kench, who's really popular right now. She's great with Braum. You stun him with Braum. Throw the Chompers on him. The next stun's automatically going to hit. Great with Morgana. Just anything that has CC, she's going to be good. Great with Recon Engage. So I think Jinx is going to definitely move up the charts a little bit. She's already really strong, and the nerf to Cog is going to help her even more. And the prevalence of Swain, so you're going to see double AP. That's definitely going to help Jinx a lot. And Tristana's another one who's going to be a big beneficiary here. Mostly AD damage, and the fact that a lot of AD champs could potentially be losing their stopwatch or paying a lot more for stopwatch is going to help Tryst out because now her safety means more because it doesn't matter as much in the mid game because everyone's going to have stopwatch anyways. Yeah, it's nice to be safe as Tryst, but everyone has that safety valve, or they did last patch. But now that people are going to be unsafe again, that's going to help out highly mobile champs like Tryst. I think Twitch could also sneak back in a little bit. I'm not sure why Twitch is not being played as much. I think maybe just Tryst and Jinx are just out-competing him. He still does scale really well. He just has a worse early game than Tryst or Jinx. I mean, Jinx's early game is pretty good with Chompers, like I just said, but Tristana's is pretty good too because she can jump forward on ganks, and she does a lot of damage early on with her bombs. So a double jump, like jump forward, fully stack the bomb, they flash, you jump again. That makes Tryst one of the best early game ADCs for gank assist. Okay, so Twitch's not going to be as good. Jinx is okay at that, but Tryst is really good. And she takes towers really quickly and has good wave clear. So Tristana's just really, really strong still, and people are just sleeping on her. Especially her level 6. Holy crap. Like, the point-click 300 damage on her ult is ludicrous. So I think Jinx and Tryst will be the biggest beneficiary, and Twitch might see a little bit more play. Although, I don't think he's going to be super popular until Jinx and Tryst get nerfed. Okay, and the stopwatch nerf also hurts Cog because that's going to hurt his safety early on. Like, he can still get stopwatch, but you're paying a lot more for it. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I think all of this means that Kog'Maw can still be good, but I think he'll step down to either lower tier 1 or possibly even tier 2. I'm going to say probably tier 2 just because of the prevalence of double AP, most likely. And just how strong Adaptive Helm's going to be in this meta. Okay, Lucian, how long we... I'll get on time. About an hour. We'll pick it up a little bit here. Lucian, pretty big buff. That's going to make Crit Lucian a lot more viable, which is great, because I'm so sick of seeing the Black Cleaver, Blazer, and King Lucian. It's such garbage bot lane. It's really bad. Just do not do that build. It's like, it's okay mid lane, it's okay top lane, but it's just not enough damage early on. Like, you need too many items for that. You need, like, 3 items. You need Blazer and King, you need Black Cleaver, and you need Phantom Dancer. Really to make that build work. So I think this is going to be a lot nicer, especially in the early game for Lucian, because now he can itemize into Essence Reaver, which is great. Has an awesome build path because it's got 2 longswords in it. You're not going to be sitting around waiting on your BF sword anymore. I think Essence might still include a BF sword. But I know it has longswords. Yeah, it still has a PF sword. So this is a very versatile build path, and that's what I love about this item. Is like if you have to back early, you can always just get a longsword. So like if you get pushed out early or you get ganked and you're low, you can always go back and get a longsword, right? Or if you just have to back, like you force the enemy out and you're ahead and you want to spend your gold, but you only have, you know, like 1,100 gold, now you can go back and get a Warhammer. Right? You don't have to feel bad because you're 200 gold short of the BF sword. You don't have to be baited by trying to get 1 or 2 more minion waves and really screw up your lane dominance. So this is such a versatile item because if you have 300, yeah, you can get the BF sword and you can match the enemy when they're getting their BF sword, when they're building towards Infinity Edge. If you have 1,100 gold, no problem. You can go back and get a full Warhammer. Great item, great power, gives you the CDR, which is awesome with your ult, gives you the attack damage. Really good buy. You only have, you know, 800 gold. I don't know if you necessarily want to get a Cloak of Agility early on, but it is out there. It's kind of a bad buy until you complete the item. But if you have the BF sword and you just need 1 more component, you can get the Agility Cloak. Or if you have to back at just weird times, like let's say that maybe you stayed in lane a little bit longer, and now you're going to go back with 1,650 gold, for example. You know, historically, if you're building towards Infinity Edge, that would suck because you can get your BF sword, but then what else are you going to get? Like a dagger or something? You know, maybe. But this lets you get these longswords. So the longsword is very, very nice. Like, this is a good build because now you can get 80 early. Because one of the big problems with some of these champions who, you know, want to rush, like I've seen a lot of people rushing, like, Static Shiv on things like Tristana or Vayne or whatever because they don't have enough gold for the BF swords. They'll just start getting daggers, or they just want a little bit of a faster power spike. A big problem with that is you're going to do a lot less damage to towers because you're not going to have AD, and it's going to make it a lot harder to last hit because you're not going to have any AD. Also, your abilities are going to do a lot less damage because, you know, Lucian's Q doesn't get any extra damage off of attack speed. Or any other champion that has like abilities that do damage. So the ability to get something like an Essence Reaver is huge. This is one of the reasons that I really like Xayah a lot, is because she can get this item. This is what you should be getting on Ashe, by the way, as well, early on. So he has really nice abilities. He's, you know, pretty mana hungry, so the critical strikes giving you back extra mana is great. Now, I don't know if like the double hit crits would restore 6% or just 1%. I don't know if they crit separately or if you crit on the first one, it automatically crits on the second. I'm not sure. I'd have to look up Lucian. I don't want to spend all the time doing that right now. But I'm just saying that this is a very, very big, and it's going to be an underrated change on Lucian, that critical strike is actually good on him. Let me just, whatever. I'll pull up Lucian really quick and just show you why this is important. And the reason is Riot has really tried to steer people away from going critical strike on Lucian. Okay, so they made his light slinger to where the second shot applies on hit effects and can critically strike for 100% plus 50% bonus damage reduced to 75% against champions and monsters. Okay, so this is the big thing, is he's only gotten, I think, 50% historically, and they just changed it to 75, right? Yeah, so he only got 50% benefit off of critical strike on his second shot, which sucks. Okay, that's a lot less damage than other champions. I think his second shot, is it full damage? It's not full damage. So his second shot only does decreased damage. It's, you know, mid-game, about 55%. But it's of your AD, so the more AD you have, the better. So once again, if you're going Blade the Ruined King, that's a very low AD damage item. So is Black Cleaver. Each one of those only has, I think, like 35 or 40 AD on it. If you're going something like Essence Reaver and Infinity Edge, those are really big AD items. So it's going to make your Light Slinger do a lot more damage. Your Q has really nice AD scaling on it as well. So that's going to be doing a lot more damage. And of course, your ultimate has a ton of AD scaling on it. I mean, 600%. So you really, really want to get AD on Lucian. It's just, it hasn't been as viable to do it because the big ticket AD items are also crit items. It's Infinity Edge and Essence Reaver. Boiler and King doesn't have AD. Black Cleaver doesn't have AD. So now that he can actually build crit, because it's going to scale a lot more. I mean, this is like 50% more critical damage on his second shot, which is massive. And they increased the scaling on this. So it went from 40% early on to 50% of attack damage. So they're really incentivizing you. So that second shot now deals 25% more damage based on your AD pre-level 6. Even at level 6, it's an extra 10% damage. And then your critical strikes do 50% effectively more damage. So they are really, really trying to get you to get Essence Reaver here. So I think this is huge. I mean, I'm not sure if this is going to put him into super top contention, top bot lane. It'll be very good for top lane Lucian. But his damage is going to spike off of this, especially in the early game. So now he can have a good, respectable single item power spike. Once he gets that Essence Reaver, he can really start slamming people. And that's going to give him just a lot more play, a lot more ults, you know, more Qs, more relentless pursuits. If you guys don't remember when Lucian was good, and there was a time where Lucian was very oppressively good. I think it was like 2 seasons ago. A big part of it was because he could just like dash around so often with relentless pursuit and just Q people, and his abilities just did so much damage, and he was so mobile. Well, this could come back because now he's going to get not only better crits, but he's going to get CDR. So up to an additional 30% CDR, which is very, very good for his dashes. Because remember, like every time he auto-attacks something, I think, for each light slinger shot landed, it goes down 4 seconds. Now, remember, this is not modified. Like, the CDR applies to the base, and then it goes down by 2 seconds. So if you have 30% CDR on 14 seconds, you know, it's only going to be a 10-second cooldown on this. If you, you know, dash, double attack somebody, that's going to go down to 6 seconds. You Q somebody, double attack again, that's going to go down to 2 seconds. And then 2 seconds are going to pass by the time you do that. So then you can dash again, double shot somebody, down to 6 seconds, Q somebody again, you know, and so on and so forth. So you're going to have this dash up with 30% CDR. You're going to have this dash up, you know, like, all the time, pretty much. You're just going to be dashing around, and it costs no mana when you max this out. So you're going to max your Q and then your E probably. But yeah, in that mid to late game, you're just going to be dashing around everywhere doing like really heavy hits on people. So I think this, and this is why Lucian has played top lane and mid lane, is because a lot of his scaling is based on his levels. So the higher level that he has, you know, the more bonus AD that he gets, the more damage his passive does, and the faster he can get this, because he needs both of these maxed, and that's when he starts going into, like, overdrive, once he can dash around everywhere and do piercing lights for max damage on a 5-second cooldown. So I think Essence Reaver is going to give you that CDR, even more CDR than Black Cleaver gives you right now. So Black Cleaver only gives you 20%. This is going to give you 30%, and it's going to give you a lot more damage than Black Cleaver does. So I'm really high on this change. I think this is very good for Lucian. I think he's going to go up a very large percentage. Like I said, I don't think he's going to be the best, but I think he's definitely going to go over 50% right now as AD carry. I think he's the worst performing AD carry right now. Now, he still doesn't have a great rune. I guess Press the Attack's probably still the best on him. Because you can dash, you know, double shot, Q, double shot, and you're going to proc the Press the Attack. So I think Press the Attack's still pretty good on him. But I think the new build will probably be Essence Reaver, Static Shiv, Infinity Edge. And I think that's going to be really big. Essence Reaver, I just can't say enough about that item. It's just, it's so, so nice for adaptability to different game states on Lucian. So, like, you know, it's just so much better than Infinity Edge, where you have to get a BF sword and then it just sucks. If you can't go back and get a pickaxe or a crit cloak, if you have to back and you're just sitting around with like 500 or 600 gold, it just feels really bad. Like, you just have to buy suboptimal items, which is why a lot of people go like BF sword into Static Shiv. But he can go full Essence Reaver early on, and that's going to give him a massive advantage. You know, when they're sitting there on BF sword plus Zeal and you have a completed Essence Reaver, you're going to blow them up. So I think, I mean, he could be as high as a top 5 AD carry on this patch. Potentially. It's going to depend on the matchups. But especially if people aren't playing heavy range champions, you know, if you're playing against a lot of tanks and stuff that you can bully out early on, I think he'll be pretty good. Now, top lane, he's going to be a nightmare versus, like, GP and these other, like, melee champions. So things like GP, Fiora, probably Camille, and things like that. He's going to be really good against those type of champions. Okay, let's move on. I think he's one of the biggest beneficiaries of this patch. It's going to help him out so much in terms of his itemization and scaling. Okay, Master Yi, Alpha. I mean, I don't think this is going to matter that much for the overall meta. Master Yi is still a good, like, booster, like, low stomp champion. But I think this isn't going to matter that much except for one-trick Master Yi's. The reason is his best build is on hit, so he's not going to benefit that much from this 35% extra bonus attack damage. I mean, I guess you could try to go something like Essence Reaver Infinity Edge on him. That would matter, but in general, I just don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. The base damage going up early on is okay, but he's really more like a late-game champion anyways. He's not getting anything late-game. I don't think mana's a big problem on him. So it's nice buffs, but they took away the meditate change that was in there, which I don't remember what it was, but that actually looks pretty intriguing. But the final patch notes, they didn't put that in, which is why I wait on the final patch notes. Like, I don't do early things like some of these other YouTubers that release stuff. They're like, you know, talking about all these changes, and they record those videos like a week before the patch notes, and then they, you know, try to send them out on like Saturday or Sunday. Like, watch out, coming in patch 8.3. But this is why I don't do it, because it's inaccurate. Like, they changed a lot of the Master Yi stuff. He doesn't have his meditate in here. They took away the Rengar stuff, and they changed around a lot of other stuff. So like I always say, I don't want to be the first person. I want to be the most accurate and like well-researched person once the patch notes actually come out. So anyways, I think for like one-trick Master Yi's, it's okay, but I don't think it's going to make a huge difference because his best build, I think, is Blood Razor, Blade the Ruined King, Rage Blade. And those items have very low AD on them. So I don't think it's going to matter. I mean, maybe if it like a Warrior Infinity Edge build with Phantom Dancer, like it'll help that out. But I think in general, if you just want a champion that's not going to be able to gank that much and is just going to power farm and just do a lot of damage later on in the game, I think just Shyvana. They haven't nerfed her yet, right? I'm trying to remember. I don't think they've nerfed this champion. And she's just been a terror for several patches now. Yeah, they haven't touched her. So I think she's still disgusting with, you know, press the attack and all that stuff, especially since they're nerfing all the stopwatch crap and inspiration, because she didn't really use that stuff that much. So that's going to make other keystones like press the attack a lot more viable. And now that they're nerfing the summoner spellbook, she loves it because she didn't want to have to use that anyways. So I think that she's the premier, like, no CC, farm it up, like just be a beast at 2 or 3 items late game type of champion. Okay, Ryze. I'm not sure how much this is going to affect his viability overall, but I'm so glad they fixed this. This is so frustrating that he like can get away from anything pretty much when he has Zhonya's plus this. Now, they did nerf Stopwatch, which he loves to build Zhonya's. So this might actually be a pretty big deal, because that's going to make him a lot less safe from level 6 onward. But he's still going to have a ton of extra damage. He still scales very well with Abyssal Mask. They did nerf his main rival in Azir, at least in pro play in the mid game, so I think he'll be okay, but this is definitely going to make him a lot less safe, which is really nice. It's just a very frustrating interaction that just feels wrong, where he could, you know, start his ult Zhonya's and then automatically get away for free. And Stopwatch just made that a lot worse, because he could do it earlier in the game before he completed Zhonya's, and it made the Zhonya's cost a lot less gold, so that he could get it faster. So I think the nerf to Stopwatch and this change is going to help out a lot for people who don't like to go against that as Ryze. Sejuani, this is fair. I mean, Sejuani's really good late game. She's really good mid game. She does really nice AP damage, good objective control, good wave clear, pretty good ganks early. So she's just too good at everything, and that's what they're saying. So now they're just clarifying that she's going to be a lot worse in the early game if she has to, because I'm pretty sure you don't max Q. I'm pretty sure you max probably your permafrost, not your Q. Your Q usually sits at 1 point, I'm pretty sure, and then you either max your permafrost, your E, or you max your W. So this is going to mean that if she has to Q over a wall primarily, so if the blast plant's down, you know, and she's trying to Q over a wall to get creative gank paths to get around wards, then she's not going to have this up for an additional 4 seconds. That's when it's going to matter the most. It's early game ganks. She's going to have to wait a little bit. So I think she'll still be good. She'll still be viable. This does help out like early or other sort of scaling tanky jungle champions. So this will help out Gragas a little bit. It's going to help out Rammus a little bit. Help out Zac a little bit. Just other champions who do similar stuff like Disruptor, you know, mid-game, late-game CC type of champions. So just makes it a bit more competitive in the jungle. So overall, I think pretty good change. Tryndamere doesn't matter. You know, there are just so many better champions that do the same thing that just basically are, you know, split pushers. And he's not even really going to be getting that much attack damage. Once again, he gets a lot of attack speed type of stuff. You know, a lot of times Tryndamere will get things like Static Shiv is really popular. Blade of the Ruined King is really popular for dueling. I mean, he can get Infinity Edge, but it's just really unlikely. The problem with all of these like bonus attack damage buffs they're giving to all these champions is there aren't a ton of good like very heavy AD items out there. Most items, I mean, I guess Ravenous Hydra is pretty legit. Like that's a good one that has a lot of AD on it. But there just are not a lot of those items. If we look at you know, the itemization here, there just aren't a lot of really good, like, heavy-hitting, like, AD items. You've got Death's Dance, just okay. Good on Draven, good on some champions. You have Essence Reaver. Okay. Once again, kind of depends on the champion on some champions. But you're not going to be getting either one of those on Master Yi. I guess you could go, like, Death's Dance early on Master Yi, but it's not that great. You have Infinity Edge, which is good. That's built on a lot of champions. But the attack speed, the Shiv items are just so good. Like, Phantom Dancer, Static Shiv, and Rapid Fire Cannon are just, like, too powerful, I think, right now. And they just squeeze out a lot of the heavy AD items. Bloodthirster, but nobody gets that. So, yeah, the flat AD items just aren't that desirable on most champions. You know, your best AD items are going to be probably Infinity Edge and... what am I thinking of? The other Hydra, Ravenous Hydra. But a lot of people aren't going to get both of those items. So there's just not a really good build path to just stack a ton of AD on champions right now, I think. So a lot of these like bonuses to AD just aren't going to be nearly as impactful as they seem. I mean, what they need to do with Tryndamere, I think, is just make him the ultimate like duelist who just completely dominates champions that don't have crowd control. Like, that's what I would like to see them do with him. And then he would still have his same weaknesses. He would still be weak to crowd control, but it would make him the ultimate, like, hey, you want to play something like a Fiora, or you want to play something like a Camille and try to 1v1 me, you're going to lose. Okay, like, I think that would be a really cool niche. So he'd still be very risky in lane. He'd still be a great split pusher, but he would be the greatest split pusher at that point. The greatest 1v1 duelist. And I think that would be good. So he would still be very weak to team play. He'd still be very weak to CC and kiting. But he would be very strong against other champions who don't have CC, that just want to sit there and fight you. So he'd be very good against Nasus. I mean, Nasus could actually beat him because Nasus could wither and, like, run away. But, like, Illaoi, Fiora, Camille. So what I think they should do to him, and this is what I would recommend, is his ult duration extends as he attacks people. So maybe, like, every time he attacks people, he gets an extra, like, 1 second or half second on his ult. So when he spins into their face, you know, starts attacking, and then once he gets low, procs it. Or they could make it to where he could do it, like, his ult before he's low. I think that might... I kind of like the... I kind of like having to wait until he's at, like, 1 health, because that provides more counterplay. Like, if you do manage to get away from him, then you can kill him afterwards. I like that ability. But yeah, I think his ult should extend every time he gets an auto attack while he's ulted. So he ults, and then each time he autos, he gets like half a second or maybe even a second. Then that way, if people just sit there and auto attack him, they die. But if they can kite him and run away, then it will run out. Up to maybe a certain cap or something. So like, kind of like Vayne's ult. You know, when Vayne gets kills or assists, she gets extra time up to a certain amount. So like, maybe you could get up to like 10 seconds of invulnerability, for example, if you keep auto attacking and it generates more time. So that could be frustrating, once again, to champions that, you know, don't have ways to interact with him. But I think he would still have counterplay, and then he'd have a very specific niche. Because right now, there's just no reason to ever pick him. You know, if you want a duelist, you know, you should just pick someone like a Camille or a Fiora for late game split push. If you want, like, lane domination and you want a bruisery AD option that's really reliable, fairly easy to play, than just like Nasus or Alawi are just better options. There's just no reason to ever pick this champion. So, yeah, I think that this is what they need to do. They need to clearly define a role for him that sets him apart from other champions, and I think that would be it, is really play around his ult, because that's the coolest part. And I think just extend it. Just, you know, let him have just a ton of time in his ult if he successfully keeps landing auto attacks. Or maybe you could say, even if maybe he has to crit. Maybe it's not every auto, but every time he crits, he gets 1 or 2 extra seconds. Just to encourage him to go for this very glass cannon crit kind of build. Which I think also makes sense with his lore and makes sense with his Blood Rage passive. Anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about Viktor here. We're almost through the notes. I don't want to take too much longer, but I do want to give ample time to these things. Okay, Viktor. So, LS, you know, I watched LS's video. He thinks Viktor's still going to be trash. That might be true, but I think there is potential for Viktor for a couple of reasons. If we look at Viktor historically, Viktor is another champion that, I think I mentioned this earlier. I don't remember if I did or not, but he was very dominant. I think it was season 5, season 6. Yes. Okay. So he was very dominant in season 6 when he got all of these nerfs. And who was I talking about with Ryze earlier? Ryze got a big nerf too. I think it was in patch 6.2. Do I still have Ryze up? I think I took it away. So it's important to contextualize this as well. Not Essence Reaver. Am I just spelling it wrong? Probably spelling it wrong. I think I was spelling it right. Anyways, whatever. Here it is. Okay, so this item's really bad now. Alright, on most champions. It's just something that you feel like you kind of have to buy if you have Leandries because of its interaction. Because it gives you that extra slow. If you look at this item historically, though, this used to be like the go-to item. This is when Viktor was really good. I think it was the Viktor Azir meta of like season 6, early season 6. So it used to be a 3,200 gold item, and it used to have 100 AP on it, and it used to give a lot more health. So it's just a really, really good bargain. I mean, 25 AP. 543 gold worth of stats. Then the health is worth 266. It's 809 gold, like basically 810 gold worth of value, right? So they basically reduced the cost by 600, and they reduced the stats by 810. So now it's just strictly less efficient than it used to be. And it's a lot less slot efficient. So when you have 6 items, this item just doesn't do as much. Also, single target ability slows used to slow by 40% for 1.5 seconds. And this is very important to understand this. Okay, so it used to last 50% longer on the slow, and it used to be 40%. And now 40% is important because that almost guarantees you're going to hit a skill shot off of this. Because there's almost no way to juke something when you're slowed by 40%. It's very, very difficult. So what you could do with Viktor then... Okay, no. Okay, so that's important. So you could go up and Q somebody and then, like, guarantee, you know, that they're going to be trapped in your W, your Vortex, they get stunned, or guarantee you're going to hit them with the Death Ray. But this is the really big one too, okay? It was a 40% slow for area of effect abilities. This was huge, because this means that your Chaos Storm, when you dropped it on them, they could almost never run out of it without a flash or a dash ability. I think Chaos Storm used to silence too. I don't remember if it still does that or not. Did they take the silence off of it? I'm pretty sure it used to silence. It might still silence. Accompanied sound effects, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Duration reduced. Ratio reduced. Initial base damage reduced. Tick interval increased a lot. So this is where they really just like punched Viktor in the face. It was like 6.9. So they took away some of the damage. Quite a bit of damage off of his death ray. Yeah, I mean, that is reduced from, you know, 70% ratio and 230 base to 180 base. But if you hit him with both parts, then you get the full bonus off of it. But it used to silence. And they reduced the damage in 5.16. Okay, anyways, I don't remember if it's silenced or not still. Let me just look it up. But it used to silence when you put it on somebody. Okay, so it interrupts channeled abilities, but it doesn't silence anymore. I swear it used to silence at some point. But anyways, like, you couldn't get away from this thing, okay? So you put it on somebody, it had a 40% slow on top of it, and it ticked like every half a second. So it just did massive damage when you dropped this on someone. Applied the slow, it guaranteed you were going to hit your death ray, your Q, and you were going to be able to hit them in your vortex with your W. So the slow was very, very important. That 40% slow, especially for area of effect abilities, because this kept reapplying. You know, every half a second, it would reapply the 40% slow. Okay, so now they changed it to this dinky 20% slow for 1 second on everybody, and now the slow doesn't refresh. It only refreshes every 2 seconds instead of every half a second on Viktor, so that means that a lot of people can just walk out of this now. Okay, so that was a brutal change for Viktor, was losing the slow, and this is going to be very important when I talk about his runes, potentially, with Glacial Augment. Alright, so this was the big problem, is they reduced the stats a lot on this item. This was his core item, and they reduced the interaction with his ult. So that sucked. The other thing that was really bad for Viktor that has hurt him a lot is they increased the cost on a lot of his glorious evolutions. So now it's just much more expensive to buy his core items. Alright, so everything's just a lot more expensive. You know, they did reduce some of the damage on his death ray and stuff like that, but he still does a lot of damage. So if we look at his abilities here, he still does a lot. Just the problem is each one of his abilities just about has counterplay to it. So if you look at his W, it can stun someone for a second and a half. It can stun a lot of people for a second and a half, and it can drag him to the center to displace him. So that's still pretty good, but you have to be able to hold someone there for 1.5 seconds to get that stun. So if they can just flash or dash out of it, that's bad. Death Ray does 410 damage when it's maxed out with a 1.2 ratio on a fairly low cooldown, not super low cooldown, but like decent cooldown. But the problem is, once again, they have to stand there for 1 second and get hit by the Death Ray. So they pretty much have to be slowed dramatically or stunned, or they're just going to walk out of this. So that's an opportunity. And then Chaos Storm. You know, up to 1,300 damage if they sit in it the full time. Now, most people are not going to sit in it the whole time, obviously. But if you can slow them a lot, they're going to be in it for quite a while. So you have to be able to consistently keep slows on them. But the Ryze slow sucks. You don't want to build that item. It's a lot less gold efficient. You don't have the 40% slow anymore. So that's why Viktor historically has been trash. A big part of it is they reduced his damage, they added a lot more counterplay to him, and they killed his core item that he can't build anymore. Okay, so let's flash forward here instead of flash back. Flash forward here. Now they have given him a buff. Okay, so now his Siphon increases his shield power. So this is good. This is going to give him pretty good trading if you want to level this up. So, like, at level 9, if you have 1,000 mana, that's 240 damage with a 0.9 AP ratio. So if you have 100 AP, then that's going to deal an extra, 90. So that's a 330 damage, and it's going to give you 128 shield with a 0.25 ratio if you have 1,000 mana. So, it's going to be like 153 shield. So that's really good trading. I mean, you're dealing 330 damage. You have a 50-something shield, and it's on like a 4-second cooldown if you want to max that out. So that's just really good sort of sustained trading in lane. And you're basically almost permanently going to have 30% extra movement speed, which is a really big deal. So you can just kite people around the whole fight and just constantly spam Siphon Powers on them. And it's going to give you really, really good, like, extended trade, damage potential. So not as much, like, sustained damage as something like an Azir or a Ryze or a Cassiopeia, but pretty good damage, great mobility, and pretty good shields over time. So that's just kind of your good sustained damage deal. However, your big damage, like burst damage build is still going to be the Aftershock damage. So it's kind of two different builds are viable now. And you're going to get the more ultimates, which is really nice. So reducing the ultimate cooldown to 80 seconds. And LS was saying, well, you don't want to cast your ultimate on cooldown. Why not? Like, it does a ton of damage. If you can hold them in it, if you can add a slow to it. So, it's really important to note, and I talked about this with Swain earlier, like that buff to Glacial Augment is a very, very big deal, because now it's going to slow them by up to 40% for 2 seconds on just an auto attack. So you just Q them, walk up into auto attack range, and you should be able to safely get your auto attack because you're going to block a lot of the damage they're throwing back at you. It's going to give you that 30% movement speed if you upgrade this. So it's going to allow you to get in close, land that slow with the Glacial Augment, and then that 40% slow is going to make it almost impossible for them to walk out of Gravity Field unless they flash, and that means you're going to hit your Death Ray, and they're going to be sitting in that Chaos Storm for a long time. Okay, and then also with that GLP, once again, the GLP Glacial Augment combo, they're going to be sitting for 5 seconds in a slow for 60%. If you hit them with your W. So you walk in. So let's say you rush GLP and you have Glacial Augment on him. I don't know. You might still... I think you can do it even without the extra movement speed. I'm not sure which you should upgrade first. The Augment to Aftershock, that's so much extra damage, or the Turbocharge Augment. I think you should probably just go for this one first and then get your second augment, make this one your second one. But either way, you go in, you auto attack, or you do Siphon Power, you auto attack to slow them down, drop your Gravity Field once they're slowed, hit them with the GLP. It's going to create that slow field around them for 5 seconds. So they're going to be stunned for 1.5 seconds, and as soon as they wake up, they're going to have a 60-second slow field on them. And that's going to guarantee that they're sitting in your Chaos Storm for at least 2 ticks, and they're going to be hit by your full damage Death Ray. That's a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage. That's a lot of slows. And then Leandri's Torment's going to be ticking the entire time as well, because you're going to have slow off your Glacial Augment, and you're going to have the slow off of GLP. So that means that all of your abilities are going to be doing that extra damage. So I think that going, the same kind of build with GLP, Leandri's, Void Staff, and a Lichbane is going to be big, big damage on Viktor potentially. So I think you'll want to go Glacial Augment, Fleet Footwork. If you go Det, that should allow you to buy your Augment a little bit faster. You could also go Biscuit, maybe in a tough lane, but I think Det's probably where you want to be with him. The Velocity, once again, is really good because you're going to apply that Glacial Augment. Velocity is going to let you get closer faster. And then similarly, you can go Cheap Shot into Ravenous Hunter, which should give you some pretty good sustain. As a mid laner, you could also consider going something like Nullifying Orb into Scorch, or Nullifying Orb into Celerity. Like, you can do some stuff as sorcery if you want. But I still think that Cheap Shot's a good opportunity, or Taste of Blood, and then Ravenous Hunter is going to give you a ton of sustain in fights, because you're going to constantly spam your Qs, you're going to have your Chaos Storm going off. I think it's going to be really good. And you don't have to buy Ryze, and you'll still get the extra slow for Liandry's off of your autos and off your GLP. So I think this is potentially a pretty good build. I'm not sure which matchups you would favor him in with this, but I think this makes him a really good sort of mid lane control mage with pretty reasonable burst damage. So kind of like an Orianna. We'll see. I mean, I think he'll be viable again. I don't necessarily think he'll be the best, probably, but I think with this build, it will definitely make him more viable. And just on a side note, I think Riot should just give him 550 range. I think that would make him a lot better in the mid lane. I don't think it's too dangerous for him to be able to proc his siphoning, his Q a little bit easier. So, I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. So I think he'll be viable. Will he be a top 5? Probably not. You know, I think that champions like Azir and Ryze will still be able to outgun him a little bit. And then things even like Kassadin will still be strong. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see. They have nerfed some of those champions quite a bit lately, and I think once people figure out about this glacial buff on him and just how powerful that is with GLP and Liandry's, I think we might see more of him. Zoe, irrelevant nerf. I don't think it's going to matter. I think Zoe's relatively okay right now. I think she needs a few items to really start powering up. So she's okay, but she's still a very dangerous mid laner with no real escapes, and she just is like gank central. If you can gank her and kill her. That's one problem with Viktor is he doesn't have very good gank assist. You know, he doesn't. I mean, it actually, the Glacial Augment would make your gank assist a lot better. You get that attack down, that 2-second slow is going to make it a lot easier to gank people, so maybe. I think Zoe will still be pretty decent. I don't think she's too far over the top. I know a lot of people complain about her. I think she's okay. Just because she's so squishy and vulnerable, and there is so much counterplay. If a tank just, you know, face blocks her Q when someone gets sleepied. Okay. And finally, with the Inspiration Tree, I think this is a great set of nerfs for several reasons. So first off, Summoner's Spell, or the Spellbook, Summoner's Spellbook, was just getting too strong. People were figuring out that, you know, even if you aren't switching your Summoners, just having an extra 30% Summoner cooldown, up to 40% if you take Ionian Boots and Cosmic Insight, and then get this, up to 40% more flashes, you know, 40% more ignites. I mean, you could just throw your ignite in lane just for funsies on a trade early on as a support, and then, you know, in some cases, like you can force the heal off the enemy, or sometimes you can just force them out of lane. And that would be up like every 2 minutes or so. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous. So it just applied a lot of extra pressure in the bot lane. And just certain champions that have extremely powerful flashes were just too strong with this. Like Alistar, Rakan in certain matchups was really good with it. Just anybody who has like a really good sort of flash engage was just too strong with this. It also provided, on the flip side, a lot of safety for champions that, you know, really rely on their flash to be able to play aggressively in lane. So it was just too versatile, and it allowed you to switch your summoners up in the mid game if you needed to teleport back to lane or whatever. So I like the ability to switch if people want to get teleport. I think that makes for some fun team comps, you know, like the Caitlyn teleporting back or the Sivir teleporting back to lane to increase the pressure. So I like that. I like it specifically for kind of mid-game sort of tactical considerations and switching the summoner spells. I think that's cool. I think that 25% was too much, because there were times where people wouldn't even switch their summoners, and it was just too powerful, just too oppressive, especially with Ignite, especially on Flash, high-impact Flash champions. So I think 15% is reasonable. They had toyed with 10%. I think that was going to be too low, but I think 15% is reasonable. So it's still pretty good for the mid-game, like summoner swapping, but it's not as oppressive as it was, especially in conjunction with the boot stopwatch nerf. So Inspiration is not like unequivocally the best tree for almost everybody right now. Okay, so that's good that they nerfed that. And don't forget also with Inspiration, this is something that I think a lot of people overlook. Some people are just like, well, why get Inspiration? Like, I don't understand Summoner spellbook. Why is that so good? People were asking me that before. Well, it's not only that it gave you the, ludicrous amount of ignites and flashes in lane, but it's also that it gives you better stats than any other tree after they nerfed the Resolve tree. Okay, so if you go, like, Inspiration into... let's click on it here. Yeah, if you go Inspiration into Resolve, then it gives you the 145 bonus health and 20% extra healing from your potions and elixirs. So that includes biscuits as well. So even on just like normal potions, having an extra 30 health is a big deal. I mean, you take 3 potions to lane, that's 90 extra health for the laning phase. It's an extra like 200 gold worth of health in the laning phase. So it just makes it very difficult to push people out of lane who get this. It gives tank supports just way too much sustainability in lane. It makes it very difficult to punish, even with champions like Nami or Sona or Lulu, champions historically that should be able to punish tanks in lane. They just can't do it because there's just too much sustain off of those elixirs and off of getting that extra 145 bonus health. So that dials that back. Where by comparison, if you remember, they nerfed this tree a while ago, and it was a nerf. They were trying to market it as like being more versatile. It's a straight up nerf. So you only get 130 bonus health if you go Resolve into Inspiration, and you don't get the potion bonus, which is a big deal. But now if you want to go Resolve into something like Sorcery or Domination, so you want to go Resolve into Domination to get like Zombie Wards, for example, you're only getting 65 bonus health and 9 bonus ability power. And they're like, oh, this is good, this diversifies stats. But it's really bad for most tanks because Braum, has virtually no scaling off of his AP. Leona has very low scaling. Shin has very low scaling. Alistar has very low scaling on the AP. They would much rather have just the full 130 health they used to get for this. So that's a big part of why Inspiration's so strong, is it has the best passive, in addition to a really strong keystone, in addition to really strong power at every single slot. So you used to be able to go perfect timing, boots, and then usually cosmic insight. All 3 of those are really strong. Whereas in the Resolve tree, you had this little garbage branch right here, which is pretty bad on most champions. Like Demolish is like okay, Unflinching is okay, I guess. Font of Life is okay, but nothing that really jumps out is like being great. Okay, like Conditioning or Iron Skin or Mirror Shield, like all of these can be very good in the early game or the mid game. And then either Second Wind or Revitalize was very good, depending on the champion. So these are good. It's just that this sucks, for the most part, compared to the Inspiration tree. And both of these got nerfed. Aftershock and Guardian got nerfed. So that's what made Inspiration so strong last patch, is that just by comparison, every single tree was way better than every other tree in most other rune slots. And the passive was a lot better. But now they changed that. Now people have to choose stopwatch or footwear. And thank God for this change. This makes me so happy because stopwatch is very frustrating. Like, yes, I ran it on a lot of champions, but it's so frustrating. It gives people basically an extra flash in the mid game, an extra get out of jail free card, and it didn't cost you that much. You could just sell it for 120 gold, which is still like an okay bargain in the mid game. And it just slowed down the game a lot because people couldn't kill other people. And it's a deterrent, is what people have to realize. I know some people are arguing in chat, well, it wasn't slowing down the game that much. Like, it's just single-time use. Yes, but it scares people because they know you have it. So it's not just that you can use it to stop a dive bot lane on your Kog'Maw, for example. You couldn't just have it on Kog'Maw and stop that dive. It's that they know you have it, so they won't dive you in the first place because they know you can potentially turn around and kill them. Because it's like Alistar Kog'Maw, and Alistar can just CC you under the tower, and you're going to die if you try to dive them, because you're not killing Alistar. Kog'Maw has his heal, his flash, and his stopwatch up, so there's no way you're going to kill him under tower, most likely. And so it was just a deterrent, and they don't have to use it. Just the threat of them having it in their inventory means that like smart players are going to be very disincentivized from getting aggressive and trying to dive and punish them under lane for running something like a Kog'Maw. Okay? So it's not just that it's single time, it's that it persisted there and it just sat there in the inventory a lot of times for a long time and made it to where people just couldn't even attempt to dive because it was scared. That's right. So a lot of like it's not exactly the same, but if you think of like nuclear threats in the Cold War, you know, Russia and the US were very powerful not because they were actually dropping nukes a lot of places, with the exception of, you know, America and Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but it was because it was the threat of the nukes. They didn't have to use any of the nukes because there was a threat of the nukes. So sometimes just having that threat is enough to completely change the landscape. I mean, that defined an entire generation of global politics. The fact that the Cold War, Russia and the US just kind of staring each other down with these nukes, even though neither one of them ever threw a nuke at each other. It's the same thing with stopwatch. People are just sitting there, and it's a Cold War, like where everyone's just farming because they're too afraid to get really aggressive and try to dive because they know the enemy has that stopwatch. And because they know they have the stopwatch, they're not going to get aggressive to make them use that stopwatch. So that means they keep the stopwatch. So yes, it's single use, but they don't actually have to use it because the other team is too scared to make them use it. And so it caused a lot more disruption than I think a lot of people realized. So it was delaying games a lot because you just can't be aggressive against that item early on. So that is a problem. And that's part of what was enabling things like Kog'Maw, like Jinx, to be very, very strong, especially Kog'Maw, is because they got a free pass in the lane. It's kind of like the Relic Shield. It's just a bit more complex. Like the Relic Shield, Fleet Footwork overheal meta just gave people infinite sustain in lane, whereas Stopwatch just made it impossible to dive people in lane. But now they've changed it. They've changed it. People will still go Stopwatch, but it has a much higher opportunity cost now. So it sells for 100 gold less, which is awesome. That's one of the big things I said, is that they should make Stopwatch just not sell for anything, broken Stopwatch. So it still sells for like something, 20 gold, but that's a lot less than 100. So basically, most champions are going to lose 100 gold on that purchase. And now you have to not get boots, and boots are still really awesome. It's about a 400 gold value. They're getting rid of the 50 gold discount that you would get off of upgrading your boots. But now you have to choose. Do you want boots or do you want stopwatch? If you want stopwatch, now you're not getting your 400 gold boots. So that's free boots for 100 gold, and then the 10 movement speed is roughly worth about 100 gold, maybe less depending on, you know, how much you're valuing that extra 10 movement speed. But it's somewhere in the neighborhood of costing you 500 gold now if you want to get that stopwatch. So it's like, yeah, that's stopwatch is still good. It still kind of creates that Cold War, but now the team that doesn't get stopwatch, that gets boots instead, is going to be 400 gold up in items. So they're basically going to get a free kill. So yeah, they're not going to kill you with stopwatch, but they don't have to anymore because they're getting a free gold worth of kill. So that kind of makes up for the fact, to some extent, that you're going to get saved once for the stopwatch. They're going to get to start with that gold. Or not start, but like once they get their boots, they're going to have that head start on you. So, really good cost. I like it. You know, I like kind of keeping stopwatch around. It's an interesting interaction, but now it has an appropriate amount of collateral opportunity cost, which I think is great. So, good move. And now it also gives Inspiration, a relatively weak tier 3 tree. So now you have to choose like Debt or Biscuits or Minion Dematerializer. So like, it's not a god-awful tree, but it's not like a Grand Slam anymore. Like, you can't get Magical Footwear and Perfect Timing. I think a lot of people probably go for Biscuit. There might be some people who get Futures Market if there's a really important buy that you need. Minion Dematerializer is something that people were playing around with on certain champions, so we might see more of this. I'm not really sure. It just depends. A lot of it depends on certain breakpoints where you can wave clear the back line immediately with certain abilities on certain champions. So I don't know the math behind all of that, but it does allow you to push faster, and it will give certain champions faster wave clear. So for example, and I don't know the exact math on this, but let's just say that Talia typically is like just a little bit short of wave clearing at level 9 with her Q, like full wave clearing the backline. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Just like imagine that it is, and then you have this Minion Dematerializer to give you that extra potentially 9% damage on the backline. Then that would allow you to wave clear like one level faster or one item faster and go roam a little bit better. So, once again, I'm not sure of the exact breakpoints on certain champions of that, but I do think that that would be something that some people would be interested in. So I think this is good. I think the tree is still very good and viable. As I talked about, I think Glacial Augment is going to be really good on Swain. I think it's going to be really good potentially on Viktor. People have been getting this more. I think you're seeing it some on Talia. So I think people are recognizing that Glacial Augment is really good, especially on champions that want to go, or that can go, either GLP or Leandries or both. So, you know, Talia is another champion who in theory could go GLP and benefit very heavily from those slows, because that means she's going to automatically hit her W on somebody after they're slowed, and then full combo, you know, blow them up, W into her little boulders on the ground, W into E for massive damage. So she's another one who could use it. So I think that Glacial, people are going to start to learn that this is really strong, especially on ranged champions after the buff. You still have pretty good choice here between Magical Footwear and Perfect Timing. Some of these are good depending on wherever, and then this is pretty good. Velocity is very good with Glacial Augment. And then Cosmic Insight's still pretty reasonable. So I think that the tree is good. I think some of the biggest winners here, at least in my mind, are going to be Zombie Ward plus Ingenious Hunter supports. Like anyone who's going to get Redemption and Locket, I think are going to like this, because you're not giving up as much opportunity cost if you want to run Ingenious now. So, and I do think that, you know, after losing a lot on this patch, trying to run things like Summoner Spellbook, I think that Zombie Ward is still really good. I went back to it the last couple of ranked days that I've done, and Zombie's still really good. You know, I think I overreacted to that nerf. Like, yeah, you don't get the free extra 3 minutes at level 1 on your wards, but you still get an extra 1 minute, which is double the time on your wards. So we were just a little spoiled earlier on, I was, with the initial Zombie Ward, but it's still good early on, and Ingenious is just so strong. It's so good, because it gives you so many extra sweeps with your sweeper, massive vision control, and it just scales so well with Redemption and Locket in the mid to the late game. With all the Clown Fiestas going on, you just really want those ultimates, basically. Like, it's an item active, but it's so strong, it's like having an extra ultimate when you have Locket and Redemption up. It just makes it almost impossible to lose a fight. So even though they took away Ruby Sightstone, even though they nerfed Zombie Ward, I still feel like it's a really good build. It actually makes things like Banner of Command a little bit more viable too, which is nice, because tanks are hurting for items still at like their, you know, 4th and 5th item slot. So that kind of opens up some more options for you there. So Guardian and Aftershock also become a bit more reasonable. So yeah, they were both nerfed, but now that everybody doesn't have to take Summoner Spellbook, these become a bit more attractive again. And there's going to be a bit more counterplay to Kog'Maw and Jinx. You can actually dive them early and get kills if they don't take Stopwatch. If they do, they're at least losing 500 gold for it. So overall, I think awesome. Good way of balancing, you know, very light approach. They didn't completely nerf out Stopwatch. People can get it. It just costs more. They didn't completely nerf out Footwear, but now you have to give up Stopwatch for it. So I like that, forcing people to make a choice about that. And then Summoner Spellbook is still good, but you only want to get it now probably if you're going to actually be able to use that switch. So switch and a teleport in the mid game, for example. Then it could be viable. So overall, great patch. I think that they are making some obscure champions like Swain, like Viktor, who are like okay, but not really that viable in most circumstances. They are definitely making them more viable, especially Swain, to a lesser extent Viktor. They did nerf some of the key offenders here in Azir, Ryze, Jarvan, in terms of dominating the meta. Kog'Maw. They're buffing other champions that really needed some love, like Lucian, who are really fun, that people like to play. They're giving him a much healthier build path. So overall, they're at least paying attention to Master Yi. I'm not going to be that upset if Yi is still not like super viable above, you know, gold or maybe even silver, except for specialists. He's a very oppressive champion when he is really good. So I'm okay with them keeping him like, you know, middling. And they're looking at champions like Trynd, who once again has a very dangerous pattern. If he's too good, he's very frustrating to play against. So I'm okay with him being middling as well. So yeah, obviously there are a couple other balancing changes. I would still like to see some changes done to Nasus or Alawi in some way. I think they're just too oppressive at like gold and lower right now in the top lane. I mean, people just aren't playing Kassadin right now, but I still think he's pretty oppressive. But overall, I think they're definitely made a lot of really good moves in the right direction. And I think this is going to balance things out. Hopefully, they'll bring in the 20% item CDR on some kind of support item. I don't know what that would be instead of Ruby Sightstone. I think Banner of Command, I've mentioned this before, I think putting it on Banner of Command would be really good, or on Zeke's. Just something that's like, or maybe Mikhail's. Just something that is, like, put it on one Enchanter item and put it on one Tank item. And just make them mutually exclusive. So just call it something like, you know, Active Master or something, so you couldn't get both of them. But just add that 20% onto relatively obscure, like, item active. So don't put it on Redemption, don't put it on Locket, don't put it on Knight's Vow. But I think they'd be safe, like, putting it on something like a Banner of Command and taking off some of the other stats. So if you look at, and I think that would make it a good, like, tank option. I mean, they could put it on Zeke's. Zeke's actually has some fringe usability right now. You don't need this item CDR on that item, but it would be very nice on Banner. And so Banner's already pretty cost efficient. You know, what they could do potentially is just like remove some of the health regen maybe, or just remove either the magic resist or the armor. So maybe they could just like remove the magic resist off of this item, or lower the armor. I mean, they could make it a 30-30, like maybe, or maybe a 40-30, or a 40-40, something like that. Take off some of the resistances off of it, then add in the 20% item CDR. So, I don't know what you would value 20% item CDR at. I know that 10% normal CDR is worth 266 gold, but that's probably a little bit better than item CDR. So maybe like if it's worth 266 at 10%, maybe you could give 20% item CDR budgeted at 500 gold. And so if that's the case, maybe you could take off like 20 armor. So you could go down to 40 armor. Oh, 20 times 20. That'd be a 400 gold budget. And then 125%. That's what? Divided by what? 5. A reju bead gives you 50%. 125% reju. Okay, so I don't know, something like that. Maybe just knock off 25% base health regen and 20 armor. That would get you somewhere between 450 and 500 gold value, and then just add in the 20% item active. I think that would be pretty legit. And then as far as like support or enchanter itemization, they could do like Mikhail's. So once again, a relatively obscure, like niche item active, and then put it on Mikhail's. It's already not super cost efficient. It's only 104% efficient. You'd have to take something off here. They could just take away Harmony, honestly. Like, take away Harmony and just give it 20% item active. You know, if you had to, you could reduce the magic resist, you know, to make the math work, to make it balanced. You could reduce the magic resist by, like, 10 or maybe even 20. Take off the passive. I'd say reduce the magic resist by 15, which would be 270 value. Or just take off Harmony, something like that, and just give it the 20% item active. Harmony really is only, like, super great for Soraka, I think. It's not really that great on a lot of other champions in the mid to the late game. So, give it to this. It would help this out. You could use this in conjunction with Redemption. You'd have 2 item actives. They'd synergize very well with each other. You get the 20% CDR. You know, it's a relatively obscure item. Like, you'd have to choose either get this, get Redemption, or get, like, Ardent Censer, or Locket. Like, you'd have a lot of good choices. But right now, this falls by the wayside a lot, except in very specific matchups. This would give you another reason to get this item. It would synergize very well and give you the active more often when you would want it against, like, as a Janna against a Thresh or something. So that's what I would do, is just budget the 20% CDR into Mikhail's Crucible, into Banner of Command, and just make them, like, more viable options that could compete with other things like Knight's Vow or like Redemption. Just to add a little bit more and just make it maybe a more powerful, like, 3rd or 4th item. in the chain. So not just add it directly on there, but take away some of the power they already have and just add in that extra little bit of item CDR just for some more intrigue, just for some more fun in there, I think. Because that CDR is like really fun to be able to use those actives, and it adds a lot more skill expression too. So you're going to have more item actives, and that just gives you more stuff to do in team fights. Just as long as it's not overpowered. And I don't think it was. Like, most people didn't even go Ingenious Hunter. Like, I was the only person, I think, on YouTube, like, with any kind of following that was advocating, like, getting that rune. And I think it was powerful, but it was so undercover. Like, pros weren't doing it very much. Most people in solo queue weren't doing it very much. So I don't think it was overpowered. It was just a lot of fun, and it was really good in certain situations. So I hope they bring it back and just add it to some of these more, like, niche support items, just to make it a fun option for people that want to use it, and potentially powerful with certain compositions or champions. So anyways, that's going to be it. Hope you enjoyed this. I know it's a long patch notes as usual. I will have the tier list video. It'll probably be tomorrow. I've got to do some coaching sessions and other things. I might be able to get it done tonight. We'll see. But I wanted to give you some really in-depth coverage, particularly of Swain, Viktor, and the inspiration tree changes, because I know a lot of people will be asking about that. So anyways, thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.